Michael Stephen adjusted his navy blue tie, staring at his reflection in the executive bathroom mirror. His brown eyes looked tired, framed by dark circles that no amount of sleep or coffee could erase. At 32, his life seemed ideal. He was CFO of a rising Boston company, owned an imported car, and lived in an upscale apartment with a harbor view. Yet, the hollowness in his chest felt unbearable, growing larger each day. A soft chime from the intercom snapped him out of his thoughts. "Mr. Stephen, the meeting starts in 5 minutes," his assistant reminded him. Michael inhaled deeply, trying to compose himself. 3 years had passed since he made a decision that haunted him every day. 3 years since he walked away from Natasha, his wife, without giving her the respect of an explanation. It was a cowardly choice, but at the time, he had convinced himself it was necessary. His career was skyrocketing, and the idea of marriage, compounded by Natasha's pregnancy announcement, had overwhelmed him. As Michael walked through the sleek, mirrored corridors of the office, he forced a smile and nodded at his colleagues. On the surface, he was a picture of success, but beneath the polished exterior, he was a man burdened by guilt. He tried to bury himself in work, chasing promotions and accolades, but nothing filled the void left by the woman he once loved. The nights were the hardest. In the stillness of his minimalist apartment, Michael often scrolled through old photos on his phone. Natasha's bright smile and the warmth of the life they had once shared stared back at him, a painful reminder of everything he had lost. He hated himself for walking away, especially knowing she had been carrying his child. The morning meeting unfolded like countless others: spreadsheets, projections, and discussions about the company's financial future. Michael presented the quarterly results with his usual competence, but his mind drifted. Once the meeting ended, he decided to grab a coffee at the cafe next door, seeking solace in the crisp autumn air. The streets of Boston were painted in hues of gold and red, the chill of the season biting at his face. As he stepped into the cafe, Michael froze. Through the window, he saw Natasha sitting at a corner table. She looked radiant, more beautiful than his memories. But she wasn't alone. 2 identical boys sat beside her, their laughter filling the air. Michael's breath caught as he took in their features. The boys were unmistakably his. Their skin was a perfect blend of his and Natasha's, their big, expressive eyes a mirror of hers. Time seemed to stand still as Michael's heart raced. Their gazes met, and Michael saw Natasha's smile falter, replaced by shock and then an unmistakable air of protectiveness. Before he could think, his feet carried him inside. "Natasha," he managed, his voice trembling. She met his gaze, her own emotions tightly controlled. "Michael," she replied, her voice firm but laced with tension. The boys looked up, curious about the man who had suddenly appeared. Michael tried to form words, but they wouldn't come. Finally, Natasha broke the silence. "Jason and Jimmy are 3, she said quietly. Michael staggered under the weight of her words. 3 years. The very time he had spent distancing himself from the life he had abandoned. His chest tightened as guilt consumed him. He looked at the boys, his sons, and realized the magnitude of his mistakes. "Mommy, who is he?" Jason asked, his innocent voice breaking the tension. Before Natasha could answer, Michael's vision blurred, and the edges of the room darkened. He fainted, overwhelmed by the emotions and the truth he had just uncovered. When he woke, Michael found himself lying on a couch at the back of the cafe. The manager stood over him, concern etched on his face. Natasha stood a few feet away, holding the boys' hands. The sight of them filled Michael with both longing and despair. "The paramedics are on their way," the manager said, but Michael barely heard him. His gaze was fixed on Natasha and the boys. "Natasha, please," he whispered, trying to sit up. She shook her head. "Not now, Michael. Rest first. We'll talk later." She turned and walked out of the cafe, the boy's small hands clasped in hers. Michael watched helplessly as they disappeared through the door. The ache in his chest, once an emptiness, now felt like an abyss. He had lost not just Natasha but a family he never knew he had. The paramedics arrived, but Michael was lost in his thoughts. He replayed Natasha's words and the image of his sons in his mind. Regret consumed him as he realized how much he had missed. At the hospital, Dr. Ava reviewed his tests. "It's just stress, Mr. Stephen. You need rest," she said kindly. Michael nodded, though he knew no amount of rest could ease the storm in his heart. Back in his apartment, Michael couldn't sleep. The memories of Natasha and the boys haunted him. He realized he couldn't let this be the end. He needed to make amends, not just for Natasha's sake but for the boys who deserved to know their father. The next morning, Michael resolved to reach out to Natasha. He knew it wouldn't be easy, trust once broken takes time to rebuild. But he was determined to prove he could be the man and father they deserved. Days turned into weeks as Michael slowly began reconnecting with Natasha. At first, she was wary, but his sincerity and dedication to earning her trust gradually softened her heart. He spent time with Jason and Jimmy, learning to be a father and cherishing every moment. In time, Michael found a new purpose. His life, once consumed by ambition and emptiness, now revolved around the family he had almost lost. Redemption was not easy, but Michael Stephen knew it was worth every effort to rebuild the life he once shattered. Michael Stephen nervously shifted in his seat at the cafe, his heart pounding. Across from him, Natasha sat silently, skimming through the documents he had placed before her. They outlined everything he hoped to change: his acknowledgement of fatherhood, retroactive financial support, and a proposed plan for supervised visits with their children. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, her expression unreadable. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why now, Michael? Why not 3 years ago when I needed you most?" Her voice held both frustration and vulnerability. Michael felt the weight of her words settle heavily on him. 3 years ago, I was selfish and scared. I ran away from responsibility. But seeing our children changed everything for me. Natasha's gaze sharpened, her skepticism evident. "Words are easy, Michael. You've always been good with them." He nodded, acknowledging her point. "That's why I didn't come empty-handed." He slid another document across the table. "I've stepped down from my role as financial director. I've taken a lower position with fewer demands so I can be present in their lives." Natasha's eyes widened. She knew how much that job had meant to him, it had been a factor in their separation. "Did you really give up your position?" she asked. "Yes," Michael replied firmly. "Some things are more important than money or ambition. It's taken me years to see that." Natasha considered his words. "The boys asked about you after the hospital visit. They're too young to grasp the truth, so I told them you were an old friend." Michael leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "How do we move forward?" "I'll follow your lead." Natasha sighed deeply. "We need to go slowly. First, I want you to meet with Dr. Ava, the boys' therapist. She's been helping us navigate their emotions. She'll guide us on how to approach this." Michael nodded. "Of course, I'll do whatever's necessary." Natasha's expression softened, but her voice carried a warning. "If you start this, you can't walk away. They've already grown up without a father. Don't let them down again." Michael swallowed hard. "I won't. I promise." Natasha stood, placing the documents into her bag. "I'll review these with my lawyer. Dr. Ava will be in touch." As she walked away, Michael called out, "Thank you, Natasha. I know I don't deserve this chance." She hesitated before replying, "You don't. But Jason and Jimmy deserve to meet their father. Don't waste it." Michael sat at the table, her words ringing in his ears. He texted his best friend, Anthony, she's agreed to consider it. I'll meet the boys' therapist first. Anthony's reply came quickly, first step taken. Keep going. Michael stared out the window, visualizing Jason and Jimmy. The magnitude of his task loomed large, but for the first time in years, he felt purposeful. Dr. Ava's office was calm and inviting, with soft green walls and a view of the Charles River. Michael sat across from her, his nerves evident. Mr. Stephen, Dr. Ava began, I've worked with Jason and Jimmy for 2 years. They're bright, sensitive boys. Michael leaned forward. How do they handle my absence? She studied him carefully. Children cope in different ways. Jason expresses curiosity through play. Jimmy, however, becomes protective of his mother. Michael's chest tightened. I've hurt them without even knowing it. Dr. Ava's tone remained professional. The past is unchangeable. What matters now is how we build a healthy future for them. Reintroducing yourself will be a delicate process. Trust must be earned. Michael nodded. What do I need to do? Initially, supervised meetings in a neutral environment, here in my office, are best. You'll be introduced as a family friend. Building trust is key before revealing your role as their father. Michael's heart raced. And how long will that take? Dr. Ava responded thoughtfully, it depends on the boys. This process requires patience. The assistant entered, handing Dr. Ava a folder. Photos Naomi sent. Dr. Ava passed them to Michael. His hands trembled as he flipped through images of Jason and Jimmy's milestones, newborns, birthdays, first steps. Tears welled in his eyes. They're incredible, he whispered. Dr. Ava smiled gently. They are. Jason is outgoing, while Jimmy is contemplative. Their bond is strong, they rely on each other. Michael stared at a photo of the twins cuddling. Have I damaged that bond? He asked. Not necessarily, Dr. Ava replied. But we must proceed carefully to preserve it. Michael handed the photos back reluctantly. What's next? He asked. Saturday, you'll meet the boys here. Remember, be natural. Let them set the pace. Michael's voice shook. What if they don't like me? Dr. Ava reassured him, children have a remarkable capacity to love, but they value authenticity. Be yourself. The thought of meeting Jason and Jimmy consumed Michael for the next few days. He prepared himself, reflecting on their personalities from the photos and stories. He knew this was his opportunity to make things right, even if it would take time. Saturday arrived, and Michael found himself seated in Dr. Ava's office, his palms sweating. Natasha entered with Jason and Jimmy, who clung to her hands. Boys, Natasha said softly, this is Michael. He's a family friend. The twins looked at him curiously but stayed close to their mother. Michael smiled warmly. Hi, Jason. Hi, Jimmy. It's nice to meet you. Jason eyed him boldly, while Jimmy hid behind Natasha. Dr. Ava guided the interaction, encouraging small steps like sharing toys. Gradually, Jason opened up, asking Michael questions about his favorite games. Jimmy remained cautious, watching silently. Michael respected his space, engaging with Jason while occasionally glancing at Jimmy with a gentle smile. Dr. Ava later explained, Jimmy needs time to feel secure. Don't rush him. Michael nodded, determined to be patient. Over several weeks, their interactions grew more comfortable. Jason's energy brought light to their meetings, while Jimmy began to offer shy smiles. Natasha observed quietly, her guard still up but softening as she saw Michael's genuine effort. One day, Jason ran to Michael, hugging him tightly. Will you come next time? He asked. Michael's throat tightened. Of course, buddy. Jimmy, standing nearby, whispered, me too? Michael knelt to his level. Always, Jimmy. The boy's cautious expression melted into a smile. The progress was slow but steady. Michael cherished every moment, from Jason's playful antics to Jimmy's growing trust. Natasha remained protective but acknowledged his commitment. They began discussing ways to gradually expand his role in the twins' lives. Michael knew he couldn't erase the past, but he was building a future. For the first time, he felt whole, not as the ambitious professional he once was, but as a father determined to earn his place. The journey was far from over, but it was one he was willing to take, step by step. Michael Stephen stood outside the office, staring at the building with a mixture of hope and trepidation. It was Saturday, the day he'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Inside, Natasha and the twins, Jason and Jimmy, were waiting for him. It had been years since Michael had seen them, and he knew this first meeting would be crucial. Dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt, Michael wanted to appear approachable, but his nerves betrayed him. He wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans and took a deep breath before stepping through the door. The therapy room was colorful and inviting, filled with toys and crafts to make the children comfortable. Dr. Ava greeted him with a reassuring smile. "Are you ready, Michael?" she asked gently. He nodded, but his voice caught as he responded, "As ready as I'll ever be." The walls seemed to close in as he heard footsteps in the hallway. Natasha entered, holding the hands of two identical boys. Jason and Jimmy had grown so much since Michael last saw them, and his heart ached with both regret and hope. "Boys, this is Michael," Dr. Ava began. "He's a friend who's here to spend some time with us today." Jason, the more outgoing of the two, stepped forward first. "Hi, do you like dinosaurs?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Michael smiled genuinely. "I do. My favorite is the Triceratops." Jason grinned, quickly launching into a discussion about dinosaurs. Jimmy stayed closer to Natasha, watching quietly but listening intently. Dr. Ava suggested they sit at the small table to draw dinosaurs together. Jason eagerly grabbed crayons and paper, while Jimmy hesitated. Natasha knelt down beside him, whispering encouragement. Slowly, Jimmy joined them, sitting across from Michael. "Can you draw a pterodactyl?" Jimmy asked softly. Michael nodded. "I'll try, but you might have to help me get the wings right." The ice was beginning to break, and Michael felt his anxiety start to ease as they colored and chatted. Over the next hour, the room was filled with laughter and conversation. Jason animatedly roared like a T-Rex while Jimmy explained facts about prehistoric creatures. Michael listened intently, learning that Jason loved performing and making people laugh, while Jimmy was more reserved, enjoying quiet observation and sharing knowledge when he felt comfortable. These small glimpses into their personalities were precious, and Michael cherished every moment. As the session ended, Jimmy surprised everyone by speaking up. "Are you coming back?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael glanced at Natasha and Dr. Ava for approval before answering. "If it's okay with your mom and Dr. Ava, I'd love to come back." Natasha nodded slightly, and Jimmy gave a small, shy smile. Jason, on the other hand, waved enthusiastically. "Next time, we can draw a velociraptor." When Natasha and the boys left, Michael sat in the empty room with Dr. Ava. "They're amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Ava nodded. "This was a good start, Michael, but it's just the beginning. Consistency is key. They need to see that you're here to stay." Michael nodded, determined. "I won't let them down again." 2 weeks later, Michael arrived at the therapy office for his third session. This time, only Natasha was in the waiting room. "Jason has a fever," she explained, but Jimmy insisted on coming. Michael's heart raced at the thought of spending time with one twin without the other. It was a significant step that Jimmy had chosen to come despite Jason's absence. Inside the room, Jimmy was quietly arranging plastic dinosaurs on the carpet. When Michael entered, his face lit up. "I brought Jason's dinosaurs too," he said proudly. Michael knelt down beside him. "That was kind of you," he said. "How's Jason feeling?" Jimmy shrugged. "Sad. We're never apart, but I promised to tell him everything." Michael pulled a picture book about dinosaurs from his backpack. "I thought you and Jason might like this," he said, handing it to Jimmy. The boy's eyes widened with excitement. "Wow! Can I take it home to show Jason?" Michael glanced at Natasha, who nodded. "Of course," she said, "as long as you take good care of it." Jimmy nodded solemnly. "I will." Their time together was quieter than previous sessions, but Michael saw it as progress. Jimmy opened up more, asking questions and sharing his thoughts. He was thoughtful and observant, qualities that Michael admired deeply. For Michael, every word and smile from Jimmy felt like a victory, a step toward building the trust he had lost. Later that afternoon, Michael met with Dr. Ava to discuss the session. "Jimmy is naturally more reserved, but he's beginning to warm up to you," she observed. "His willingness to come today without Jason speaks volumes." Michael nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "What's next?" he asked. Dr. Ava suggested continuing the one-on-one sessions while Jason recovered. When Michael left the office, he walked to a nearby park. Watching families play together, he felt a mix of emotions, regret for the years he had missed and hope for the future he was beginning to build. He imagined himself there with Jason and Jimmy, sharing laughter and creating memories. The following week, Jason was well enough to join the session. He burst into the room with boundless energy, eager to show Michael a new dinosaur toy. Jimmy was quieter, observing the interactions but contributing when he felt comfortable. Michael marveled at how different and yet how connected the twins were. Over time, the sessions became a routine. Michael began to notice the small details about his sons, the way Jason's laughter filled the room and the way Jimmy's eyes lit up when he talked about something he loved. These moments became the foundation of the relationship he was building with them. Natasha, too, started to soften. She watched Michael's interactions with the boys closely, and while her guard remained up, she couldn't deny the progress he was making. "They're happy," she admitted one day, "and that's what matters most." Dr. Ava suggested that Michael write letters to the boys, sharing memories and thoughts he hadn't been able to express in person. "It's a way to bridge the gap," she explained. Michael took the assignment seriously, pouring his heart into each letter. One day, Jimmy asked Michael, "Why weren't you here before?" The question caught him off guard, but he answered honestly. "I made mistakes, and I'm so sorry for them. But I'm here now, and I won't leave again." Jimmy nodded, his quiet acceptance a sign of trust. As the weeks turned into months, Michael's bond with Jason and Jimmy deepened. They began to look forward to their time together, and Natasha started allowing unsupervised visits. For Michael, these moments were everything, a chance to be the father he had always wanted to be. One sunny afternoon, Michael took the boys to the park for the first time. As they ran ahead, laughing and playing, he sat on a bench and watched them, his heart full. For the first time in years, he felt whole. This was just the beginning, but Michael knew he would never take another moment with his sons for granted. Michael, Stephen and Natasha had never been in this situation before, but life had a way of bringing the unexpected. Michael sat with Jimmy, Natasha's 3-year-old son, leafing through a book about dinosaurs. The vibrant illustrations sparked endless questions from the curious child, and Michael answered them all with patience and enthusiasm. Jimmy absorbed the information like a sponge, surprising Michael with his knowledge at such a young age. Out of nowhere, Jimmy's tone changed. "Michael," he said seriously, "why did you only come to see us now?" Michael felt the weight of the question, knowing Natasha and Dr. Ava were silently observing. "It's complicated," Michael started cautiously. Sometimes adults make mistakes. Big mistakes. Jimmy tilted his head, thinking. Jason thinks you're leaving again, he said, his honesty cutting deep into Michael. Michael swallowed hard and asked, "What about you, Jimmy? What do you think?" Jimmy looked up, meeting his gaze. "I don't think you will," he said simply. "You draw good pictures, and you know cool stories. And you look at us like Mom does, happy and sad at the same time." Michael felt a lump in his throat but managed a smile. "I promise I won't leave. I'll be here as long as you and Jason want me to." "Pinky promise?" Jimmy asked, holding out his tiny hand. Michael linked his pinky finger with Jimmy's, sealing a bond more significant than words could express. At the session's end, Jimmy hugged Michael, a small but monumental gesture that left him overwhelmed. As Natasha prepared to leave with Jimmy, Michael mentioned Dr. Richards, an excellent pediatrician he knew, in case Jason's fever persisted. Natasha hesitated but nodded her thanks. Dr. Ava later told Michael how pivotal the session had been. Jimmy's trust in Michael was growing faster than anticipated, and even Jason, though absent, had been a constant topic in their conversation. "Jimmy's observation about your emotions was profound," Dr. Ava added. "Children see more than we think." Michael nodded, deeply moved. "That hug," he said, "was everything. It broke and mended me at the same time." Later that evening, Michael received a text from Natasha. "Jason wants to know if you'll bring the book next week. He wants to see it with you." Michael smiled as he typed back, "Of course. I hope he feels better soon." That small gesture from Jason marked a turning point. It wasn't just a book, it was a bridge between them, a sign of trust he was determined to honor. The following Wednesday night, Natasha called Michael in a panic. "Jason has a high fever," she said. "We're heading to Mass General." Michael didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," he said, grabbing his keys. 20 minutes later, he found Natasha in the pediatric emergency room, cradling a sleeping Jimmy. "Where's Jason?" Michael asked, breathless. Natasha gestured to the treatment area. Dr. Richards soon approached them. "Jason has a serious bacterial infection," he explained. "We're starting 4 antibiotics, and he'll need to stay for a few days." Natasha looked worried, and Jimmy, now awake, insisted on staying with his brother. Dr. Richards agreed to bring in an extra bed for Jimmy. It was unconventional, but the twins' bond was undeniable. The next hours were a blur of medical procedures and waiting. Michael ensured the boys received the best care, using his connections to arrange a private room. By 3 a.m., Jason was asleep, his small hand still clutching Michael's. Jimmy dozed in the extra bed, and Natasha sat nearby, too anxious to rest. "You should sleep," Michael urged her gently. "I can't," Natasha admitted, her eyes fixed on the boys. "Every time I close my eyes, I imagine something going wrong." Michael offered to keep watch. "I'll wake you if anything changes," he promised. Natasha hesitated before finally agreeing, her exhaustion evident. "You've changed, Michael," she said quietly, settling into the chair. Michael nodded, his gaze never leaving Jason. "I had to. They've changed everything for me." The silence in the room was heavy with unspoken emotions, interrupted only by the steady beeping of monitors. "When I found out I was having twins," Natasha whispered, "I wondered how you'd react if you'd stayed. Would you have panicked even more?" Michael's voice was low. "Probably. And that's my biggest regret, not being there for those moments, even the hard ones." Natasha shared how she had sung through sleepless nights during the twins' first illness, a double ear infection when they were 8 months old. Michael's heart ached as he realized how much he had missed. "I'm sorry, Natasha," he said, his voice breaking. "I wasn't there when you needed me most. But I'm here now, and I'll never leave again." Natasha studied his face, her expression softening. "I think I'm starting to believe you," she said. Her words carried the faintest trace of hope. By morning, Jason's fever had broken, and the antibiotics were working. Jimmy was the first to wake, his immediate concern being Jason. "Is he okay now?" he asked Michael. Michael reassured him, explaining that Jason was on the mend. Natasha watched the interaction with a quiet smile. Later that day, as the family prepared to leave the hospital, Natasha thanked Michael. "You didn't have to stay all night," she said. "But you did. That means more than you know." Michael shrugged. "It's what I should have done all along," he replied simply. Driving home, Michael reflected on how far they had come in such a short time. The twins were still young, but they were teaching him more about love and resilience than he had ever known. He vowed to be the father they deserved, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next few weeks brought more milestones. Jason and Jimmy grew more comfortable with Michael, who made every effort to keep his promises. Whether it was drawing dinosaurs, reading bedtime stories, or attending their pediatric checkups, Michael was there, proving his commitment one moment at a time. Natasha, too, began to soften. She saw how Michael's presence had positively affected the boys. The walls she had built around her heart started to crumble as she witnessed his genuine efforts to make amends and be the father their sons needed. One afternoon, as the boys played at a park, Natasha turned to Michael. "You've made a lot of progress," she said. "But this isn't just about them. It's about us too. Can we rebuild what we had?" Michael looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "I'd like to try," he said earnestly. In the months that followed, the family slowly began to heal. Trust was rebuilt, and love found its way back into their lives. Michael learned that fatherhood wasn't about perfection but presence, and Natasha learned that forgiveness could be a pathway to a new beginning. Together, they created a future filled with hope, love, and the laughter of two extraordinary boys. The night crawled at a snail's pace. Around 5 in the morning, Jason's fever began to drop. Jimmy, waking briefly, climbed into his brother's bed and immediately drifted back to sleep, curling up next to him. The sight was so tender that Michael's chest tightened. As dawn broke and the room was bathed in soft golden light, Michael noticed Natasha asleep in the armchair, her exhaustion evident. Quietly, he grabbed an extra blanket from the nurse and draped it over her, careful not to wake her. Seated amidst his most cherished people, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. Despite the trials of the night, he realized that this, being with his children and Natasha, was where he was meant to be. The nurse entered to check Jason's vitals and paused, smiling at the tableau. "You're a beautiful family," she whispered. Michael didn't correct her. Instead, he looked at Natasha and the boys, savoring the bittersweet weight of her words. 6 weeks had passed since Jason's hospital stay, and the family dynamics had begun to shift. Visits at Dr. Ava's office remained consistent, but unplanned encounters were becoming more frequent, an afternoon at the park, a coincidental supermarket run. That Sunday, Michael waited nervously at the Boston Children's Museum for a special surprise meeting. This outing marked a milestone. Natasha had allowed him to spend time with the boys outside the structured environment of therapy sessions. "Michael!" Jimmy's excited yell echoed through the museum lobby as he ran toward him, Jason close behind. Natasha followed at a steady pace, her expression guarded. "You came," Jason said, his confidence in Michael's presence growing by the day. "Of course, I did," Michael replied, kneeling to meet them at eye level. "I couldn't miss this chance to explore the museum with my 2 favorite adventurers." The next few hours were magical. In the building zone, Michael helped the boys create a towering structure with foam blocks. In the science lab, they marveled at simple experiments. Jason's enthusiasm was boundless as he crafted a bubble nearly the size of his head. "Look! It's like a planet," he declared. "Almost Jupiter," Jimmy chimed in. Michael watched, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude for the moments he now shared with them. Lunch in the museum cafeteria brought an unexpected conversation. Natasha leaned in and, in a soft voice, mentioned the boys' upcoming school play. "They're performing as Mars and Saturn," she said, her tone measured. Michael's heart soared. "Would they want me there?" he asked tentatively. Natasha hesitated before nodding. "It's Thursday at 2, she added. Michael immediately promised, "I'll be there. Nothing will stop me." The play marked a pivotal moment for Michael. It was his first invitation to an official event in his children's lives. He spent the next days juggling his work calendar to ensure he'd be free. His apartment's calendar, once filled solely with meetings, was now decorated with reminders of school events and therapy sessions. The date of the play stood out, circled boldly in red. Thursday arrived, and Michael reached the school auditorium early, his nerves on edge. Spotting Elizabeth, Natasha's mother, he hesitated before approaching. "May I sit here?" he asked. Elizabeth studied him for a moment before nodding. "Natasha told me you'd be here," she said softly. "Miles had a bit of an anxiety attack earlier, but he's okay now." Michael's heart clenched. "Did he ask about me?" he asked. Elizabeth nodded. The curtains opened, revealing a solar system set that dazzled the audience. Jimmy, in his Mars costume, entered confidently, spinning and jumping with energy. When Jason, dressed as Saturn, appeared, Michael held his breath. For a moment, Jason hesitated, scanning the crowd. When his eyes met Michael's, a smile lit his face, and he began his routine with renewed confidence. "That helped," Elizabeth whispered. "He's calmer now." Michael simply nodded, overwhelmed. As the performance unfolded, the twins demonstrated their unique bond. Mars and Saturn danced together in an unscripted moment that charmed the audience. The applause at the end was thunderous, and Michael stood instantly. Elizabeth placed a hand on his arm, urging patience. "Wait," she said gently. Backstage, the boys ran to Michael, their faces glowing with pride. "Did you see us?" Jason asked. "I wouldn't have missed it for anything," Michael assured him, crouching to their level. Jimmy chimed in, "I was Mars, and I was the best." Michael laughed, hugging them both tightly. Natasha watched from a distance, a small smile gracing her lips. As the family left the auditorium together, the boys begged to show Michael their costumes again at home. Natasha hesitated but promised, maybe soon. It was a small step, but one that gave Michael hope. He watched them drive away, his heart full yet aching with the desire for more moments like this. That night, Michael received a message from Natasha, a photo of the boys asleep, still wearing their costumes. The gesture felt like an olive branch, a subtle acknowledgement of his growing role in their lives. He saved the photo, staring at it until sleep overtook him. The next few weeks saw Michael integrating further into the boys' lives. He joined them for park outings, bedtime stories, and even helped Jason with a school project. These moments, though small, began to build trust between him and Natasha. "You're really trying," she admitted one day. "They deserve it," Michael replied. Dr. Ava noticed the changes, too. "The boys seem more secure," she remarked during a session. "Your presence is making a difference." Michael felt a swell of pride but remained humble. "I just want them to feel loved," he said simply. Jimmy and Jason's bond grew even stronger as Michael became a consistent figure. They frequently drew pictures of the family, often including Michael now. Natasha kept these drawings, a quiet acknowledgement of the progress they had made together. One evening, Natasha invited Michael to dinner at her house. It was the first time he would be stepping into their home. Nervous but elated, Michael arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a board game for the boys. The evening was warm and filled with laughter. Over time, Michael and Natasha began discussing co-parenting more openly. While there were still challenges, they both prioritized the boys' well-being. "We're figuring this out," Natasha said one day. Together, Michael agreed. By the end of the year, Michael felt more integrated into his children's lives than he had ever imagined. Their shared milestones, birthdays, school events, and quiet evenings, became the foundation of a new chapter. Sitting by the fireplace one snowy evening, Michael watched Jason and Jimmy build a tower with blocks. Natasha joined him, handing him a mug of hot cocoa. "You've come a long way," she said softly. Michael smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." As Natasha stepped away from her children, entrusting Michael with a significant portion of her confidence for the first time, the house seemed to resonate with the quiet promise of new beginnings. Michael, standing in the cozy living room, let his gaze linger on the family photos adorning the walls. Each picture told a story of milestones he had missed, first steps, birthdays, and countless moments of joy. A pang of regret flickered through him, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the privilege of being invited into their world. Upstairs, the soft stirrings of Jason and Jimmy indicated they were waking, and Michael braced himself for the joy and challenge of a morning with his sons. Ascending the stairs, Michael carefully avoided the stuffed dinosaurs and scattered books that lined the way. Peeking into the twins' room, he found Jason greeting him with a sleepy smile. "Where's Mommy?" the boy asked. Michael explained that Natasha had taken Grandma Elizabeth to the doctor but would be back soon. "I'm here to hang out with you guys," he added with a cheerful grin. Jason nodded, while Jimmy, cocooned in his solar system blanket, appeared unsure. Noticing his hesitation, Michael knelt and reassured him, "Grandma will be fine. Let's make today fun." The words seemed to ease Jimmy's worries, and soon the three were discussing breakfast plans. "Pancakes!" Jason and Jimmy shouted in unison. In the kitchen, Michael quickly discovered that cooking for two energetic 3-year-olds was a delightful challenge. Jason eagerly stirred the batter, creating a small flour storm, while Jimmy meticulously counted chocolate chips. When they mentioned their mom's pancake faces, Michael rose to the occasion, using blueberries and chocolate chips to create grinning designs. "Like this?" he asked, holding up a lopsided pancake smile. The boys erupted into giggles, filling the kitchen with warmth and laughter. As they enjoyed their smiling pancakes, Michael's eyes caught a drawing pinned to the fridge. It depicted 3 stick figures holding hands, a taller one flanked by 2 smaller ones. Jason pointed to it with pride. "I made that. It's us at the museum." Michael swallowed hard, touched by the artwork. "That's amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're quite the artist." Jimmy chimed in shyly, "There are more in our room." Michael couldn't wait to see them. After breakfast, the boys gave Michael a tour of their world, proudly showcasing their favorite corners and treasures. Their room was a vibrant mix of planets, dinosaurs, and creativity. One wall featured a collage of drawings of Michael with the boys. "We used to imagine what you were like before we met you," Jimmy said softly. Overwhelmed, Michael knelt and hugged them both. "I love every single one of these," he said. The boys beamed, their bond with their father strengthening with each shared moment. The morning unfolded in a joyful blur of games, stories, and laughter. Michael discovered Jason's love for organizing toys by color and Jimmy's gift for storytelling, as he spun tales of space adventures and dinosaur escapades. Despite their unique interests, the twins remained inseparable, always consulting each other before making decisions. Michael marveled at their connection, feeling a growing sense of pride and belonging. When Natasha returned in the early afternoon, she found her family napping together on the living room sofa. Michael sat in the center with a storybook open on his lap, Jason and Jimmy curled up on either side. Natasha paused, absorbing the sight. It was a moment she had often imagined during her pregnancy, a peaceful, united family. Seeing it come to life filled her with relief and hope. "Hey," Michael whispered, stirring as Natasha entered. "How's Elizabeth?" Natasha sank into an armchair nearby, her expression soft. "She's fine. Just a twisted ankle. The doctor said she needs rest." Michael nodded, glancing at the twins, still fast asleep. "They've been amazing," he said quietly, careful not to wake them. Natasha smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude for Michael's effort and the natural ease with which he had embraced his role. When Jason and Jimmy woke up, their excitement at seeing Natasha was palpable. They clamored to recount their morning adventures, from pancake making to exploring their favorite corners of the house. Natasha listened intently, her smile growing as the boys shared their stories. Michael watched the interaction, his heart full. He felt grateful for the trust Natasha had placed in him. That evening, Natasha sent Michael a photo of the boys in their pajamas, proudly holding the drawings they had shown him earlier. "Thank you for today," the message read. Michael stared at the picture, his heart swelling with gratitude. He replied simply, "Thank you for letting me be a part of it." It had been a small but significant step toward building a stronger, united family. Here is your revised text without paragraph numbers. "How was it here?" Natasha asked softly, standing in the dimly lit room, her gaze fixed on her sleeping boys. Michael smiled warmly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Perfect," he replied. "They're just perfect." Natasha nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "This is the first time I've seen them sleep so peacefully with someone other than me," she admitted. The words hung in the air, carrying a weight far beyond their simplicity. It was more than a compliment, it was an acknowledgement of Michael's growing role in their lives, a tentative step toward deeper trust. Michael hesitated, his emotions evident in his voice. "Natasha, thank you for giving me this chance, for trusting me with them." Her response was simple but profound. "You've proven you deserve that trust," she said. As the twins continued their peaceful slumber, Michael realized the significance of that morning. He was no longer a visitor or a temporary presence in their lives. He was becoming a part of their routine, their home, and their story. Autumn arrived in Boston with a sudden chill, bringing vibrant foliage and crisp air. 3 months had passed since that pivotal morning at Natasha's house. In that time, Michael's connection with Jason and Jimmy deepened, and a steady routine had emerged. He now spent Saturday mornings with them, along with weeknight visits when possible. Despite the progress, an unexpected message one stormy evening tested the fragile balance they had built. "Jason is having a panic attack because of the thunder," Natasha texted. "He asked for you." Michael's heart clenched. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and braved the pounding rain, navigating slick streets to their home. Natasha met him at the door, her exhaustion evident. "He's in his room," she said, her voice heavy. As thunder shook the house, a frightened scream pierced the air from upstairs, spurring Michael into action. Michael found Jason curled up on his bed, his small frame trembling with fear. Jimmy sat beside him, holding his hand and whispering soothing words. Michael's chest tightened at the sight. "Hey, champ," he said gently, kneeling beside the bed. "Can I sit with you?" Jason nodded tearfully and launched himself into Michael's arms. "It's too noisy," Jason sobbed. Michael hugged him close. "I know, buddy. But I have a trick to make storms less scary." Jimmy leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "What trick?" he asked. Michael smiled, pulling out his phone. "We'll count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder," he explained. "The more seconds, the further away the storm is." A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and together they counted. 1, 2, 3, they said in unison before the thunder rolled in. 3 seconds means the storm is 3 miles away, Michael said, reassuring them. Natasha watched quietly from the doorway as Michael engaged with the boys. His calm demeanor and creative approach to the storm impressed her. Gradually, the gaps between the lightning and thunder grew longer, and Jason relaxed in Michael's arms. Jimmy stayed close, ever the protective brother, his watchful gaze softening as the storm began to wane. "How about a story while we wait for the storm to pass?" Michael suggested. The twins nodded eagerly. "I'll tell you about two little warriors who were never afraid, because they always had each other." As Michael spun a tale inspired by the boys' bond, Natasha felt tears well up. His words captured the strength and love the brothers had shared since birth, and the boys listened intently until their eyelids grew heavy. By the time the storm faded to a soft drizzle, the twins were asleep, their heads resting on Michael's shoulders. He gently tucked them into Jason's bed, where they always sought comfort together on difficult nights. As Michael stepped out of the room, Natasha met him in the hallway. "You have a way with them," she said, her tone warm with admiration. Michael smiled, following her downstairs. "I learned from you," he admitted. "From the stories you tell and the photos you share." Natasha prepared tea, her movements fluid in the familiar rhythm of her kitchen. "For a long time, I wondered what it would be like to have help on nights like this," she said. "The storms, the fevers, the nightmares." Michael's voice grew thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," he said. "It's not about the past anymore," Natasha replied, handing him a cup of tea. "It's about how you're here now and making a difference." They sat at the kitchen table, the gentle patter of rain punctuating the silence. Michael hesitated before speaking. "I know we're still building this new dynamic, but I'm committed to this, to them. To being the father they deserve." Natasha studied his face, her expression softening. "I see that," she said finally. "In how you've reorganized your life, respected our boundaries, and worked to understand them." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft noise upstairs. Both rose quickly to check on the boys, finding Jason awake and peering out the window. "Is the storm gone?" Jason asked anxiously as Michael entered the room. "It's almost gone," Michael assured him, sitting beside the bed. "Want me to stay until it's over?" Jason nodded, snuggling into Michael's side. Natasha watched from the doorway as Michael counted seconds with his son, his voice a soothing presence in the darkened room. When Jason drifted back to sleep, Michael carefully tucked him in beside Jimmy. "I think I should head out," he whispered to Natasha. She glanced at the rain still falling outside. "It's late." "The sofa's comfortable," she said. Her offer was more than practical, it was a gesture of trust and acceptance. "Thank you," Michael said, understanding the deeper meaning of her words. As he settled on the sofa that night, he reflected on how far they had come. Storms, he realized, weren't just destructive, they could clear the air, uncover truths, and strengthen bonds. 2 weeks later, Michael and Natasha sat together in Dr. Ava's office for their first joint therapy session without the boys. The therapist began, "The twins have made remarkable progress in adapting to Michael's presence. How do you feel about this evolution?" Natasha was the first to answer, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's been surprising how naturally they've accepted him. Sometimes, it feels like he's always been here." "But?" Dr. Ava prompted gently. Natasha sighed. "But there are moments when fear creeps in. Fear that this is temporary." Michael listened intently, the weight of her words pressing on his heart. "I understand that fear," he said softly. "I know I caused it with my past actions, and I'm working every day to prove that I'm here for the long haul." Dr. Ava nodded. "How do you address that fear?" she asked Natasha. "By focusing on the present," Natasha replied. "Seeing how he's shown up for them, how he's rebuilt their trust and mine." Michael met her gaze, gratitude and determination clear in his expression. "Progress takes time," Dr. Ava said. "And from what I see, you're both committed to creating a stable, loving environment for the twins." Michael and Natasha exchanged a glance, silently affirming their shared goal. The session marked a turning point in their co-parenting journey, a shared acknowledgement of their growth and their hopes for the future. That evening, as Michael left Natasha's house, Jason ran to the door and called out, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Michael crouched to meet his son's gaze. "Always, champ," he promised. As he walked to his car, he felt a sense of peace and purpose. He wasn't just building a relationship with his sons, he was building a family, one stormy night and one quiet promise at a time. "Every day is a new promise for me," Michael said, meeting Natasha's eyes. "Every moment with them is my chance to show I've changed and that I'm committed." Dr. Ava, seated across from them, made a few notes before continuing. "The boys have shared some interesting thoughts during their individual sessions," she began. "Jimmy, especially, has been asking questions about the past." Natasha's posture stiffened, her expression tense. "What kind of questions?" Natasha asked, her voice laced with concern. Dr. Ava looked at her gently. "He wants to know why Michael wasn't there from the beginning. As their bond with him grows, these questions are natural." Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "How do we handle this?" he asked. Dr. Ava replied, with age-appropriate honesty. "They need a story they can understand, one that assures them it wasn't their fault." Natasha took a shaky breath. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if the truth hurts them?" Michael spoke softly, his voice filled with remorse. "The truth has already hurt them, Natasha. My absence has already caused pain. Now, we need to help them heal." Dr. Ava nodded. "Exactly. Addressing the past honestly is essential to rebuilding trust." Dr. Ava shifted the conversation. "With the holidays approaching, there's another important topic to discuss. Christmas." The room grew silent as Natasha hesitated. "We usually spend Christmas Eve at my mother's house," she explained. "Christmas morning has always been just the three of us." Michael quickly interjected, "I don't want to disrupt your traditions." Natasha's expression softened. "The boys asked if you'd join us," she said. "They want you to be part of it." Dr. Ava leaned forward slightly. "How do you feel about creating new traditions together?" Natasha blinked back unexpected tears. "For 3 years, I've built our traditions alone," she said. "Every ornament, every story was my way of filling the gap you left." Michael's chest tightened. "Natasha, he began, but she cut him off gently. "I see how happy the boys are when you're around. How they trust you. Maybe it's time to build something new, something that includes all the broken and mended pieces of our lives." Michael nodded, overwhelmed by the vulnerability in her words. "What would this new tradition look like?" Dr. Ava prompted. Michael hesitated before speaking. "Maybe I could join you on Christmas morning," he suggested. "After your family time." Natasha considered this. "The boys usually wake up at 6. Would 8 o'clock for breakfast and presents work?" Michael smiled, his gratitude evident. "That would be perfect." Dr. Ava asked, "Is there anything else you'd like to address?" Natasha hesitated but then spoke up. "Michael, the boys have a choir recital next week. They'd like you to sit with us, with the family." The weight of the word family lingered in the air. Michael's voice wavered. "Are you sure?" he asked. Natasha's reply was firm. "Yes. It's time we stop pretending we're just acquaintances sharing children. We're a family. Different, imperfect, but still a family." Dr. Ava smiled. "That's significant progress," she said. Michael swallowed hard, his eyes shimmering with emotion. "I'm grateful," he said softly. "Infinitely grateful." As the session ended, they walked together to the parking lot. Snow had begun to fall, blanketing the ground in quiet stillness. Natasha, Michael called before she opened her car door. Thank you for everything. She paused, the snowflakes catching in her hair. Do you know what Jason told me last night? She asked. Michael shook his head, curious. He said his heart was getting bigger because now there's more room for love, Natasha said, her voice soft. Michael felt his carefully held composure break as tears slipped down his cheeks. Our children, Natasha continued, teach us about forgiveness and love every day. Maybe it's time we learned from them. Michael stood in the snow after Natasha drove away, reflecting on her words. The snowflakes fell gently, a symbol of new beginnings. In 2 weeks, he would experience his first Christmas as a father. It was a gift he never thought he'd have, one he vowed to treasure forever. As the snow blanketed Boston, Michael prepared for the recital. On the evening of the event, he arrived early and joined Natasha and the boys in the school auditorium. Jason and Jimmy beamed when they saw him. Dad, you made it. Jason exclaimed, the word Dad filling Michael's heart with pride and humility. During the recital, Michael's eyes welled up as he watched his sons sing with confidence and joy. Sitting beside Natasha, he felt the unspoken connection between them, a shared love for the boys that transcended their past mistakes. When the performance ended, Jason and Jimmy ran to him, their faces glowing with happiness. That night, as they walked back to the car, Jason held Michael's hand tightly. Are you coming to Christmas, Dad? He asked. Absolutely, Michael promised, his voice steady with conviction. Natasha glanced at him, her expression a mix of relief and trust. For the first time, the word family felt tangible. In the days leading up to Christmas, Michael and Natasha worked together to make the holiday special. They decorated the tree with the boys, shared stories, and baked cookies. It was a new rhythm, one filled with laughter and hope. Each moment felt like a step toward healing and unity. On Christmas morning, Michael arrived promptly at 8, as promised. The boys greeted him with excitement, pulling him into the living room to open presents. Natasha watched from the kitchen, her heart full as she saw the joy on her sons' faces. For the first time, she felt at peace with this new chapter. After breakfast, the family sat together, sharing stories and laughter. Michael couldn't help but marvel at the life they were building. This is what I've always wanted, he thought to himself, silently vowing to never take it for granted. Later that day, as the snow continued to fall, Natasha handed Michael a cup of hot cocoa. Thank you for being here, she said softly. Michael met her gaze, his voice steady. I'm here to stay, he said. For them, and for this family. The evening ended with Jason and Jimmy curled up on the couch, their heads resting on Michael's shoulders. Natasha sat beside them, the glow of the Christmas tree casting a warm light over the room. As Michael looked around, he realized that sometimes, the hardest scars lead to the most beautiful beginnings. This wasn't just a Christmas, it was the start of a new life. Your contribution in this channel is very important. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you next time.